Hey everyone, what's going on? It's 2 minutes to review. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
Longest album review in under 2 minutes wins. And you click the picture, you know the album. This feels kind of weird saying this, but you know the album already because, it's been out for just a little bit of time. But it is celebrating.
More specifically, almost 30 years.
I was about to say, it's celebrating a very important anniversary this year. And we are talking about Nirvana's In Utero.
You beat me to it. I couldn't even ask you, Matt, hey, ready to feel old? Because, yeah, you're going to feel old when you say out loud, In Utero, Nirvana's final studio album, is 30 years old this month. Oh, my goodness. Of course, if you're a Nirvana fan, or honestly, if you're someone who does not live under a rock, yeah, you're going to know Nirvana for Nevermind and Smells Like Teen Spirit. I mean, that album, huge game changer. I know that word kind of gets thrown around a lot, but Nevermind was a game-changing album. But the reason why we're here talking about In Utero is because that album is essentially, without, maybe going too much into our, review, and basically one asking, what would a band sound like if they have to follow up the most massively huge, successful rock album of the decade, but they didn't want to? It's almost the best way to describe the early 90s, and that there's no other time period in music where this kind of album could have been as hugely commercially successful than in 1993. So in celebration of the 30th anniversary, spoiler alert, but we're going to get into a little bit more detail here. And I'm sure we're not telling you anything that you don't know, unless if maybe you were living on a rock, you're like, Nirvana released another album that wasn't called Nevermind? Yeah, they released more music than that. And of course, it's also significant because it's the last album of new material that they recorded with Kurt Cobain before he committed suicide. So we're celebrating the 30th anniversary by each revisiting this album. We're going to give our 2-minute review to see who gives the longest one, another 2 minutes. But Matt, I'm going to shock you.
You want to go first?
No, I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, look at that.
I know. Because, normally we do new music, but you know what? Since we're celebrating a classic album, let's change it up. I'll let you go first. How about that?
Well, it's 95 degrees outside, and, hell froze over. Okay.
That's true.
All right.
You let me know when you're ready.
All right. Let's do it.
3, 2, 1, go.
So, re-listening to this album and knowing everything that we know about Nirvana now, to me, this album is just right down the pipe of everything that Nirvana was about, right? If you listen to the Unplugged album that they did on MTV, what did they do? They wanted to stick it to the establishment, and they didn't want to play any of their big hits. They did covers that nobody knew that they could perform or that they had performed ever or even knew. And, how do you be Nirvana, and how do you follow up the biggest album of all time? You do one of the biggest albums of all time. You go back and you do an album that is not only shocking because it's so different than what we got with Nevermind, but it also plays on that fact that, we don't sound like we want to play hits. Like, if you listen to the difference between In Utero and Nevermind, you can tell that Nirvana was trying to take chances on more of what I would call a ballady album than what we're used to from Nirvana. Like, Nirvana and Nevermind wanted to pound your face off with guitar riffs and just heavy, dirty, grungy sounding music. This one kind of, in my opinion, spat in the face of grunge a little bit and said, you know what? You expect us to be grunge, and we're going to do something just a little bit different. It still has their Nirvana edge, but it plays to the softer side of what Nirvana was trying to do when they stuck it to the man in the Unplugged album.
Time is locked in. So out of 5 stars, now that you've had 30 years to sit on this album, what would you give it?
I would give it 4.5 stars. It is not a 5-star album. There's, in my opinion, some of the songs feel a little filler, but I think that could potentially be intentional. Feels like they really wanted to, I don't want to say not perform because that's not the right way to say it, but they didn't want to play to the fullest of their ability or really go all out again because that's what everybody wanted. Everybody wanted Nevermind. Everybody wanted that Nirvana. Everybody wanted another album just like that. And it's Nirvana sticking it to expectations. They're sticking it to the man. They're sticking it to everything because, well, we don't want to do what you're telling us to do. It's a detriment to the album in some ways, but it's still the spirit of Nirvana. You know, you can't deny Nirvana with what they meant to music. So even with them not trying as hard, they still put out some stone cold classics on here.
You mentioned about there's no denying about the legacy of Nirvana, and I had some thoughts on that I will wait to share after my review. And with
All
that in
right.
mind, good sir, would you do me the favor of counting me down?
3, 2, 1, go.
So this really might be, if you were to look back at all the albums of the 90s, this really might be the most hate-filled, angriest sounding rock album of the 90s. I mean, again, not surprising given the history of the making of it, but you can really just feel the hate and disdain that Kurt and the band have throughout making this album. I mean, and not just in the heavy moments, which, side note, I forgot how heavy Nirvana can get until I heard the song Scentless Apprentice again, or even just Heart Shaped Box, which of course was a single. But I mean, even on the softer songs like All Apologies and Dumb, I mean, you can just hear how they just were so full of rage and just not happy about what was going on with themselves despite all the success. And in a way, you can almost argue that this is what self-sabotage sounds like, that they were trying so hard, as Matt even said, to go against the system, which is ironic because in a way that everything that they were doing to self-sabotage themselves worked and made it so beloved, because if you think about it, it captures all of the non-happy feelings we all experience day in and day out. It's it's rebelling against those who are trying to say, forget about it, just move on, be happy what you have. And this album's like, no, I have a right to be angry. I have a right to not feel okay. And if you look at the time period it came out, Nirvana opened the floodgates for bands to be like, no, it's okay to say I'm not happy, or not, and not just to scream off my head either. It fed into what fans were looking for. And if you had to make a comparison almost, and again, talking about the self-sabotage, and this is going to sound weird, but if you recall the whole theme of the movie, The Producers, where they're essentially trying to make a musical that bombed, but ultimately it ends up backfiring on them because everyone ended up loving it for all the wrong reasons, of course. But I can almost hear Kurt and them recording a song like Rape Me, which is a very powerful and poignant message to it, but almost like them going, man, the record label is going to hate how this starts off sounding like the song that they wanted to sound like, but then they hear the lyrics and are going to be pissed off. I could just see them being disappointed when the label or people going, oh no, that's a great song. Like you could just hear them thinking, yeah, this is going to piss people off. And that's kind of the beauty, because in the end of the day, sometimes we just want to piss people off.
And out of 5 stars, what would you give it?
I'm going to give it 4 stars. Going back to what I was kind of teasing before, it's a little time for me to be honest. For a long, long time in my life, I always thought Nirvana was a little, dare I say, overrated. When I first heard them, I loved them. And then and I think it kind of ties into more as just, I hate to say this, but they've been kind of overplayed to the point that it kind of makes you go, that just, no, there's bands like Soundgarden or Alice in Chains that do it so much better. Even Mudhoney. But then you just stop and be like, you know what? No, let me stop with this, me being a jerk, and actually listen to the songs. And you forget how, in the end of the day, Kurt Cobain really was a powerful voice in music. And that literally, and I think this album in particular, even more so than Nevermind, it proves how, despite every ingredient that would make you believe that Nirvana shouldn't work, it works. Listen to the softer songs, and so I remember even just reading about the Unplugged album, how they had a bit of an issue with Dave Grohl because he never really learned how to play soft at the time. He really was a heavy metal drummer at heart. that they actually tricked him into playing softer by buying him a gift. And it was like, there's like, I forget what they call it, but the stick drums. Like, so like you have to play soft because it's just an acoustic kind of drumstick. Like you have some, like you can almost hear just like even on the softer moments, Dave Grohl coming in with like the more heavier beat. So all these ingredients that really shouldn't mix end up being so raw that you appreciate it for what it is. And you took it for granted because it became so massive. But yeah, I think it was nice to revisit this and to remind myself, yeah, they had some damn freaking good songs. They could go from sounding like Black Sabbath and Metallica to the Beatles in a heartbeat.
In Utero definitely is by accident their most mature sounding album,
Yeah.
right? Like it's Kurt Cobain throwing a temper tantrum and saying, I don't want to do what I'm expected to do. I'm going to do everything against the system. And it comes off as way more mature than Nevermind ever did.
Yeah, that's a fair way to say it. I mean, because think about it. How relatable is that? How often do you just want to go, screw this? Screw doing this and that. And here's Kurt Cobain basically doing that for 12 songs in 41 minutes.
And you know, another thing that I was thinking about too is this album also probably gives you more insight into the mind of Kurt Cobain than expected. So if you think of the album and like a lot of the tone on the album, it is more on the downside, more on the like the depressive side of things. But then when it picks up in a fit of rage and kind of seems like a duality in his mind. Like
Yeah.
could that have led to him committing suicide, or could it have led to, you know, everything that became his undoing? Could
Well, it's funny you
some
say it because I mean, he also has gone. I feel like I read somewhere that he was saying that it was going to be his more impersonal album. But to your point, it really does come off as personal. Like, and
very,
I think it's fair to say that no one was more shocked at how well this album did than probably Kurt, Dave, and Krist and Kirst.
yep.
Like, they probably were like, wait, it is number one. It is. We're going to go back on tour. Like, it's just like, I'm sure that probably led to even more of a downward spiral, and it backfired in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pose a controversial question here. Do you think this album works despite it's because of how talented the three of them together are? That despite them trying to, again, maybe some people might take issue with me saying that they're trying to self-sabotage themselves here. But do you think that it ended up working just because they were that talented, or do you think it's a result of the fact that they ended up having Bob Lidwig and Steve Witt kind of come back after they recorded Steve and work on mastering the album to make it a little bit more appealing?
No, I don't think that's it at all. I think it's the talent of, honestly, I think it's the talent of Dave Grohl starting, because if you think about it too, like Dave Grohl started to put together music that nobody heard of yet, which eventually became the first Foo Fighters album. And you could hear on that album elements of In Utero. And I think that with the minds of Dave Grohl and Kurt Cobain, like we never got to fully see what Kurt Cobain could do. Like who knew, like was Nevermind the best that he could ever offer? Was In Utero another level of the mastery that he had? Could he have done something else after this if he didn't commit suicide? Like I think there's a lot of unknowns with Cobain, and I think that we just scratched the surface with these two albums. And I think that the minds of those two alone together, I think that you saw what I don't care means, and I don't care means we care a lot.
It's true. Well, I'm also going to probably say something that might make people's eyes roll because, I mean, I think it's universally known how much everyone loves Dave Grohl. But I would, dare I say, argue that Dave Grohl does not get enough credit for what he did in Nirvana.
No.
Um, I mean, forget even the fact that that drum beat to Smells Like Teen Spirit on Nevermind is so iconic and took that song to another level. But even if you listen to songs like Milk It or even All Apologies, his drumming on paper and in theory should not mesh well with what Kurt was doing, but it added such a different texture to what could have otherwise been just kind of more softer alt rock, that it added an element to it that made it feel darker, that made it feel just more powerful. Like, to your point, I feel like each of the three of them added some sort of level to the music on this album that makes it so unique and interesting, that they really were such a tight trio. Again, I know this is going to sound dumb, but I kind of forgot how good of a guitar player Kurt was until I revisited this album too. Like, you kind of think of him as a little bit more on the sloppier side, or just more on his effort is where it counts, but he really was a damn good songwriter. He really did know how to write a hook, and he really did know how to get the most out of his instrument. Less is more for sure, but he knew how to make every chord count. And you hear that on a song like Scentless Apprentice, and even Milk It and Tourette's. Like, his guitar work was almost as powerful as his voice, which is saying a lot, because that's, I think, a lot of people really remember that most about him is his voice and lyrics.
One thing I can say is what they suck at, just absolutely are horrible at.
Let's get into the negative. Yeah,
is sabotaging themselves. That's
yeah.
it. That's it. They suck at trying to sabotage themselves, because the Unplugged album. Hold on, the Unplugged album itself was like, we're not going to play any of our hits. Okay, you recorded really awesome covers on there, and to hear hear the music arranged differently because it was acoustic, speaks volumes. And it's a classic Unplugged album in the era where everybody was just trying to do an Unplugged album because that's what was big with MTV at the time. Okay, fine. And then we do this album, and this album was like, oh, well, like we just said, screw the system. And, well, you became even more popular.
They really
another number one album.
They were trendsetters, and like everything they did, like, it just set the bar higher, and that became the standard for how you did an Unplugged album, or that's the standard you did for. What leads me to this question, though, is, would you agree or disagree with this statement? In Utero could only have been successful in 1993. Could it have come out any other time in the 90s and been as successful as it was? Or do you think it was the right time, right place?
I think you could have gotten away with it up until the end of the 90s. It didn't have to be 93. It could have just been anywhere in the 90s. In the later part of the 90s, it could have been kind of like a throwback album, like, oh, this is what we were doing 6 years ago, or even earlier than that, like 8 years ago, because wasn't Nevermind 91? Yeah.
91, yeah.
Yeah. So if Nevermind was 91 and they did this in 1999, okay, well, we did that 8 years ago. You know what? We're going to put out an album that's kind of like that. And I think it would have been just as big of a hit as it was in 93.
So I'm torn, because on the one hand, I think if you look historically as the 90s progressed and led into 2000, you saw rock kind of heading into, like, past 96. You started to see music get a little, dare I say, happier. Almost as if some people are like, you know what? Okay, we had a good cry in the beginning of the decade. We got our anger out. I need some No Doubt. I need some more of this upbeat ska, or I need some more of this, like, ska meets pop. Like, it just kind of went in a more happier, poppier direction. But then you could also make the argument. I mean, listen, like, there's bands like Smash Mouth that became big in the late 90s. You also saw with the rise of nu metal how the whole party lifestyle that came with the hair metal scene in the 80s. Well, you know, the early 90s, it was completely against that. It's like, no, that's unacceptable. If you're treating women as pieces of meat, that's unacceptable. You started to see that trend of, you know what? No, I kind of want to see people flash their private parts at me mentality, and the debauchery of rock and roll come back towards the end of the 90s. With all that said, you could argue that it was because of Nirvana and the gateway that they opened for that more reflective, personal, and anger-filled Seattle sound music that came out in the 90s that led to that. So maybe if they continued making music, maybe that trend could have continued on, or maybe it would have just been extended. So I don't know. That's my long-winded way of saying, who's to say?
I did, because I just said it.
You know what we can say, though? Who gave the longest review in under 2 minutes? So, Matt, you ready to find out if you won?
I know I won.
Well, because I probably went over, didn't I?
I know I won. Even if I went over, I know I won.
That's a cocky statement.
Oh, no. No, it's not. Go ahead. What's my time?
1 minute and 45 seconds.
Okay. Awesome. Because you came in at just a shade under 3 minutes at 2 minutes and 54 seconds.
I wasn't. Wow.
Yeah, I know I won.
Fair enough. But what say you, dear listener?
Did you win?
Did you? We all won because we got to revisit this great album from Nirvana. Matt, would you say this album aged well?
Yeah. It's just as classic as Nevermind in completely different reasons.
Well said. Well then, listener, do you agree or disagree? Do you think that we're giving this album way too much credit? We're giving Nirvana way too much credit? Or do we have our heads up our butts and we need to just praise everything that Nirvana ever did? Let us know at Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, Threads, any social media platform that you have, at Epic Footnote. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can also not only listen to more episodes like this, including a ton of Dave Grohl episode related things. So, we love Dave Grohl and Foo Fighters, so of course we talk about them a lot. But also check out some shorts as well. And also a massive, massive thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Make sure you log on to lucky13beardco.com. If you've ever wanted to try beard bombs and oils, these are the gentlemen you want to purchase them from because they are of the highest quality. They make you feel great. You're going to smell epic. We have our own beard oil with them. It's called the Lemmy. It's in tribute to Lemmy from Motorhead, bourbon, tobacco, cola, leather. You will smell incredible. It is one of the best beard oils I've ever tried, and it's not just because it's ours, but it's because it's from Lucky 13. And if that scent is not your thing, they've got a ton of other scents for you to try out, and we're giving you 10% off of your entire order. Make sure you use the code EFP10 at checkout. Lucky13, the number beardco.com, EFP10 to get 10% off your entire order at checkout.
And if you want to support us a little bit more, maybe help us fund so we can keep doing podcasts like this, or even just show off the fact that you listen to two guys talking about albums, go to Linktree/Epic Footnote or the link in our bio on any of our social media pages, where you'll find a link to our merch page. We're selling t-shirts, coffee mugs, hats, hoodies with our cool little logo on it. Great way to show support for us so we can keep doing this. And before I actually sign off, because we talked about Kurt Cobain and how he was clearly depressed and, of course, led to his suicide and him leaving this earth too soon. If you are feeling those similar thoughts, or if you are feeling alone, first off, you're not alone. Please reach out to someone for help. Lots of services out there to help. Remember, you're not alone, no matter how hard life might feel at the moment. Inspired by Kurt Cobain, just want to remind everyone there that you're not alone. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you join us for another episode real soon.
Have a good one.